Defense Administration presents Reconnaissance Functions of the Block Warden. Good evening. It's good to see this big turnout for this neighborhood meeting. As you know, I'm Block Warden Ed Casey. We've got a pretty vital part of civil defense to discuss tonight. During the war, I happened to serve as intelligence officer. Our unit's job was to get information about the enemy, evaluate it, disseminate it. In civil defense, we have a similar responsibility. After an atomic attack, or in fact other emergencies, we've got to go into action immediately. But we've got to be sure it's the right action. Action that comes from the right planning. And the right planning is based on reliable information. Getting that basic, reliable information is reconnaissance. But how do we get this information? And what kind of information? And how do we know it's reliable information? Answer: planning. No one can expect to go out without a plan and do effective reconnaissance. He or she can't get a clear picture of the effects of a disaster or atomic attack on people or terrain without a plan, a workable procedure. First, let's take up the three types of information that reconnaissance should produce. Let me introduce Ray Kaufman, a civil defense worker who happened to be present during last year's big explosion and fire on the Gulf Coast.
The first type of information needed was effects of the disaster. For instance, the number and types of fires. A quick estimate of the number of casualties and trapped persons. For an initial report, the number of damaged buildings and the amount of damage to utilities.
May I ask a question?
Go right ahead.
What's the procedure for unexploded enemy bombs?
Well, the idea is to do everything possible to keep unexploded enemy ordnance isolated, to block off the area and keep people away. We found, too, that we wanted to know as early as possible the effective strength of organized self-protection units and whether groups are orderly or disorderly. Naturally, we were anxious to get a quick picture of the state of supplies, food, tools, other materials that would be useful for protective measures.
May I break in for a moment?
Yes, of course. Friends, this is Block Warden Ralph Nelson.
I'd like to add one other very important type of information that comes under effects of attack or disaster. The absence of fire, casualties, or damage. We want to know right away which areas are free of damage so that we can use them as evacuation sites for our own block residents and people from nearby areas. Casey, I believe you want to take it from here.
Yes, thank you.
Any further questions? In that case, let's go to other information items we want. Terrain information. If we're hit by atomic attack, we want to know as soon as possible the condition of streets and alleys. Are they choked with debris? What streets are still open so that our evacuation, first aid, and other services will have clear paths of entry and exit? Conditions of communications and transportation. Are telephone lines down? What vehicles can still be operated? Question from the audience? I'm a meteorologist. Our professional groups have been thinking a good bit about weather information with regard to enemy attack. How about telling the group the breakdown of this information? The temperature during the time of attack should be noted, and of course rainfall, fog, clouds, and wind conditions. These items would mean a lot in how you fought fires, the type of clothing to be given to evacuees, even the visibility factor.
I'd like to ask a question, Mr. Casey. You've spoken of actual reconnaissance as the method of getting all of this information. Well, where do we fit in? How can we help?
I was coming to that. Actual observation is only part of the information gathering plan. We want to examine reports from wardens and neighborhood groups, question block residents and members of other civil defense services entering our block. Every member of the block, therefore, is a potential source of information. That's one way you can help. Those of you who are special or building wardens will be particularly busy in funneling information to us as soon as possible after an attack. Another way of gathering information is from examination of documents, such as your block census data, block maps, and other previously made records. As a matter of fact, planning is a good word to remember. To achieve effective reconnaissance, we're going to have to do a lot of planning. For instance, we must map out in advance the fastest observational routes through the block. In other words, know in advance the exact path to be taken in case of attack, and certainly some emergency alternative routes. But mapping the route isn't enough. We must do some dry runs, drill and practice, go over the routes time and time again until we know them letter perfect. With good fast routes in mind and a clear picture of the type of information we want, we should be able to gather data that will result in sound decisions for the welfare of our block. Information that should strengthen decisions already made, help us avoid the unexpected, speed up decisions for future operations. I believe Mrs. Cartwright has a question.
Mr. Casey, I was in Warden during the last war. We had definite posts to reach at night as well as in the daytime.
We must place special emphasis on night drill so that we can find our way in complete darkness. Suppose you tell us about it, Mrs. Cartwright.
We found out that urban areas looked a lot different at night. Of course, we had flashlights on hand, but we made it a practice once a month to reach our posts entirely in the dark.
Thanks, Mrs. Cartwright. Now, suppose we apply some of these ideas. Let's assume that the enemy hits this city with an atomic bomb. We're in a fringe area, maybe 40% damage. According to civil defense procedure, these are the things that I would do as block warden. While the mushroom cloud was still climbing into the sky, I'd get to the telephone fast, call the district report center. The conversation from my end might go something like this. Hello, district report center. Get me Burnside. Burnside, this is Casey. Establish contact by phone or messenger with nearby block wardens and the district warden. Got it? Okay. Give me Warden Ross. Casey, get this. I'm delegating responsibility for reconnaissance on casualties and trapped persons to your group. Get going. That's the way it might go. Knowing that the boys were all set with established telephone and radio contacts and messenger service, I'd head out on initial reconnaissance. Chances are that I'd be pretty much limited to ground activity, and within seconds, I'd be pushing through debris and other obstacles. But even obstacles wouldn't stop me on our planned reconnaissance route. Even calls from people who needed help must temporarily go by the board. I'd have to remember that the block reconnaissance involves everybody. I'd have to think of the broad picture, knowing that you members of this block civil defense group would show up very soon to help these people. And as I raced as rapidly as possible over the reconnaissance route, I'd make quick notes on certain key information, such as fire, casualties, trapped persons. And always, I'd be on special lookout for any evidences of biological or chemical warfare. I wouldn't wait until I'd completed the entire reconnaissance. Once I had a quick estimate of the situation, I'd send an initial report by messenger to the report center fast. The message would read something like this. Preliminary reconnaissance report. On map 3, fires at points 93, 86, 17, and 48. Fires at 22 and 31 out of control. Not much in casualties in the fired areas. Rescue work should be pretty general, but concentrate at the supermarket. They've got it bad. Tell first aid to spread 3 ways. Small units to the grade school and general area. Main group to the supermarket. How are communications holding up?
Doing okay, Warden. Messengers and police are filling in where phone lines are down.
With initial reconnaissance out of the way, I'd go after detailed information continuously so that first aid, evacuation, firefighting, rescue, and emergency welfare units would be alert to changing conditions. I'd keep contact with the post, and I'd keep hammering away at certain important functions of the block group.
Have you checked Mrs. Margaret Hubbard is accounted for?
Yes, all but 5 residents accounted for. Search the wreckage carefully. Are you marking buildings so you won't search them twice?
Standard procedure, Casey.
I'd be sure a message got to the report center giving the streets that are safe for evacuation routes. How's the tool situation, Joe?
Emergency stocks are in the clear, and the store areas in the south and the east are undamaged and being used fast.
Let's assume now that most of the reconnaissance information has been gathered. The next job is to evaluate the data received so that it'll be worthy of dissemination. Sometimes evaluation would take place while information was being gathered, sometimes later. But in all cases, whether from actual observance, from hearsay, or from a written report, we pass along our comments on the reliability of the data. One of the key methods of verifying new data is by weighing it against information previously received and already proved. This is a job for the report center. The final aspect of our reconnaissance operation is dissemination of information with special attention to the urgent items, like fires. The rest of dissemination would take place by periodic reports and summaries, some of which would be passed on to higher civil defense headquarters, so sound decisions could be made in directing overall civil defense operations. What have I forgotten, Coughlin?
You may have forgotten it tonight, Casey, but when the chips are down, you don't forget to exchange items of information with wardens of nearby blocks.
You're not kidding, Coughlin. We sure can't afford to forget that important interchange of information. It's essential to promote mutual action for mutual welfare. The last item is the importance of good written records. Emergency Welfare Warden Jane Burnside, who also directs our administrative procedures, will give you the fill-in on that.
The original scribbled notes taken by the block warden during reconnaissance certainly are part of the record. Later, when things cool down, I'd have one of the staff make notes for the block post log. The block post log is a very vital record. In it are recorded all the decisions made by the warden and his staff, all the actions taken, and reports from the warden. Well, I think that's it, Mr. Casey. I'll turn it back to you.
Let me wind up this meeting by giving you a summary of the points we've hit. Reconnaissance of effects of attack on people and property works smoothly when we all know in advance what information to look for, when we've prepared ourselves by day and night drills. Actual observation is supplemented by examination of documents and reports and by questioning residents. Initial reconnaissance, sparked by fast communications, must be hurried, concentrating on fires, rescue work, first aid, and communication problems. After that, reconnaissance will continue more thoroughly to get more detailed information by swift but careful checking to be incorporated in supplemental reports. Reconnaissance items, the basis for actions, decisions, and planning civil defense operations, will be screened for special facts to pass on to higher headquarters, any technical or specialist groups operating within the block or adjacent block wardens. And last, records of reconnaissance operations will be kept up to date in the block post log. Are there any questions before we close this meeting? If there are, ask them now before any emergency. All of you, I know, are aware of the importance of reconnaissance functions for warden personnel. How these functions are the means of tying together all the vital operations of civil defense to save lives, reduce property loss.